Welcome back. This video will cover part 2 of Chapter 8, Biopsychology, Neuropsychology, and Cognitive Neuropsychology for PSY 120, Careers in Psychology, Neuroscience, and Human Development. So how do you prepare if your interests are in this area and you want to seek a bachelor's level career either temporarily or for the long term? What kind of coursework can be helpful? The usual suspects arise, but you'll see a decided slant in the direction of biology and chemistry, abnormal psychology, biopsych, neuroscience courses, chemistry, biology courses, cognitive psychology, and so on, but also some more niche classes like neuropsychology and psychological assessment, if your institution has them, can be really helpful. What kind of elective coursework? Lots of that bio and chem. So anatomy and physiology, biology, chemistry and biochem, genetics, microbiology, and neuroscience are really helpful. What kind of applied experiences could you seek out while you're in college? Doing work at facilities that where care is delivered to people with developmental disabilities, working in doctor's offices, hospitals, neuro and rehab centers, neuroclinics, pharmacies, etc. Any of those areas can be really provide you with really valuable experience watching what those what people who seek care in these environments, what they look like, what their experiences are, and how treatment is provided to them. What kind of research experiences? The usual suspects. You're going to want to look for faculty who have interest in neuroscience, in health psychology, in biology, in cognition and developmental, as well as in psychopathology. So what are the opportunities with a graduate degree in this domain? On the practice side, there are individuals referred to as clinical neuropsychologists who take the research about the connection between the brain and nervous system and behavior, cognition and emotion to help people achieve better functioning. So specifically with cognitive problems, the clinical neuropsychologist may actually work with someone who, say, experiences a specific brain injury, either through accident or stroke or something like that, and then work with them to identify what their limitations are and work to restore function after injury. So they're going to be engaged in assessing primarily cognitive functioning in a clinical setting, helping other professionals to diagnose and treat brain conditions. So you could have people who are developing mild cognitive dysfunction or early symptoms, say, of dementia. The cognitive neuropsychologist may be the one who comes in and does the initial diagnostics and testing, but also providing treatment that's on the psychological side. So a neurologist may prescribe medications. The clinical neuropsychologist may work with the person in terms of skill building and restoration of function. Assessment is a big part of what clinical neuropsychologists do. They're doing neuropsych assessments whenever there's some kind of question about brain function. So frequently what you'll have is a neurologist who sees someone and says, we need to do a workup, we need to do a neuropsych assessment. So then they'll send you off to work with a clinical neuropsychologist to do that testing. That report will then come back to the neurologist or other practitioner. They may, though, be involved in direct treatment, providing treatment directly. doing interventions, doing rehabilitation services. So you may in fact have, let's say, the work location is a rehabilitation facility that works with people after stroke and other kinds of brain injuries. The clinical neuropsychologist is going to be working with a team of other professionals to provide interventions and rehabilitation services to help people become more independent, more functional, to recover from their injuries. What are some employment locations? Some are in medical settings, hospitals, rehab centers, specialty clinics, and so on. Some are in private practice. Some are in public and private agencies, and a variety of other contexts. But they rarely work without a team of other individuals. So when we talk about neuropsych assessments, what do we really mean? Neuropsych assessments are evaluations of how well a person is functioning. It can include interviews, paper and pencil tests, examinations of medical records, behavioral assessments, like of attention, memory, and language, and so on. What's the purpose of neuropsych assessments? To help practitioners to determine whether what they're looking at is neurological as opposed to psychological, or is it both, localizing and diagnosing certain kinds of damage or dysfunction. For example, there's this, it's something called the clock test for cognitive dysfunction. It's a fairly straightforward test that asks people to draw a clock. Now I'm thinking, okay, my Gen Z students may have never seen a regular clock, so this test may have to be replaced as your generation gets older. But anyway, there's like this time period in the progression of dementia where people stop being able to reproduce a clock, drawing the hands on the clock. So that's just a concrete example of a type of test. There are other kinds of tests like short-term memory tests of being able to recite a list of words and how many words can you get. And some tests are much more complex than that. The purpose of these tests is to facilitate treatment and rehabilitation. An emerging field is the field of neurotechnology. And in this case, what used to be seen as strictly science fiction is now becoming science fact. Neurotechnology involves devices, tools that can literally interface with the brain and the nervous system. One concrete example here, deep brain stimulation is a treatment approach that's used for some individuals with Parkinson's disease, and for some people with Tourette's syndrome, where a device, an electrical feed is directed into particular, very specific areas of the brain, and pulses of electricity are delivered to that area of the brain to change how the brain is functioning. That's just a simple example of a neurotechnology. There are lots of them. Some technologies are used for biofeedback. Some are used to restore function. Some are used to create function. So cochlear implants can be used when a person's deafness has been caused by and not so much the structure of the ear, the sensory structure, but instead the interface between those ear structures and the brain. And the cochlear implant can, in fact, make it possible for hearing to occur. Same with retinal implants. Neurotech professionals tend to work with technology companies and in research settings. Some are involved in product design and development. Some are designed in the testing of the products, more on the neuro side. So there's a wide range of possibilities here. Having a working knowledge, actually more than a working knowledge, having a deep knowledge of how neural networks work, how brain structures work, how the brain and the nervous system are involved in things like attention, memory, language, and thinking is really, really essential in this space. Cognitive neuropsychologists tend to bring with them a lot of strong research skills. And that means that for some cognitive neuropsychologists, they gravitate toward neurotechnology as a cutting-edge field where their research skills are highly valued. Pharmaceutical research is another space where people with these interests may pursue graduate education and then move on in this area. PhD level biopsychologists, for example, may find themselves working in drug development. So many of them are going to be doing research using animal models. Like I was listening to NPR 2 days ago, and they were talking about a really interesting mouse study where they're looking at a specific form of lithium and its utility for turning back the Alzheimer's clock. Really, really interesting. And the people who are doing that research are biopsychologists. So basically what they do is they have mice that are genetically prone to the kinds of brain changes that are seen in human Alzheimer's disease. And then what they did was compare mice that were exposed to this particular type of lithium versus mice who were not exposed to it. And then they looked at their brains to see whether or not you still had the same kinds of plaques and defects in the brain going forward. And they also, did some monitoring of actual behaviors. What kind of memory changes were they seeing? And they had some pretty exciting results. So it can be really rewarding work. In some cases, they're looking at testing these drugs in human participants, looking for side effects, symptom relief, what are the optimal doses, and so on. Clinical neuropsychologists and cognitive neuropsychologists may be involved in clinical trials. So once the drugs get out of early FDA processes, they've been tested in animal models and show promise, the next kind of steps involve doing clinical trials with humans. And part of what psychologists are involved in with their staff is recruiting and selecting patients, and then doing neuropsych testing before, during, and after trials to look for changes. So in that study that I was describing with the mice and that specific form of lithium, I think the report said, you'd have to fact check me on this, that they're pursuing clinical trials to look at the effects in humans with Alzheimer's disease to see if there are meaningful changes in the way people are able to think. And whether or not the use of that form of lithium is safe, is it effective, are the side effects tolerable, etc. These researchers may also be involved in, after a drug is in the market, continuing to bring in information like adverse effects reports, reports about drug interactions, long-term treatment efficacy, and so on. Like they may want to ask the question, if we deploy this drug and it's shown to be really effective, is it effective for just a few months, or is it effective long-term? Does it remain safe long-term? Those are all the kinds of questions that get asked. What are some of the graduate education and training considerations? To work in some of the spaces that I've just described that are graduate level careers, it is required to have a doctoral degree. typically a PhD in biopsych, cognitive neuropsychology, perhaps neuroscience, in order to become a biopsychologist by training. So depending on the training, you may work as a scientist or you may work as a clinical neuropsychologist in practice. Some doctoral programs are going to emphasize the neuropsychology angle, where you're looking at the study of the brain and conducting research, and these are programs typically that are designed to put people in research careers. Clinical programs are more likely to involve really getting people ready for clinical training and supervised practice. In that case, clinical neuropsychology training has a lot in common with clinical psychology training. You're going to learn the approaches, the testing, all of the practice-related elements, but also how to behave ethically and appropriately, how to communicate with patients and families, and so on. Finally, what are some of the master's level careers in these areas? As with many other areas in psychology, there are master's degree holders who are incredibly important and valuable in the work in these areas. So you have people who are research coordinators. They may be the people who do all of the recruiting and contacts with people who want to be in a clinical trial, for example. They may oversee labs. They may do data collection and data collection oversight. That may take place at universities, in government organizations, and in industry. Having a master's degree in biopsych or neuropsych or cognitive neuropsych shows that you have a solid educational background specifically in those areas, and that can make you a more attractive candidate to work in some of these laboratory settings. Same goes for a general experimental psychology master's degree with a bio emphasis to it. Regardless, you have to keep in mind that there's no clinical neuropsychology master's option, but there are individuals who get their LPC, their licensed professional counselor, who specialize in the neuropsych setting. So, for example, you may have licensed professional counselors who work in a neurology clinic, and they work to help people with their psychological reactions, their psychological symptoms and experiences that are associated with their disease. So, for example, people with Parkinson's disease routinely experience depression, as well as, just the sort of grieving and the challenges of trying to manage a chronic and progressively more debilitating illness. Having a licensed clinical counselor to work with the patient and with their family can be essential to everybody's well-being. And that concludes my coverage of Chapter 8.